This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, the editor-in-chief at FanDuel and at NumberFire.com, and this is episode 548 of the Late Round Podcast, one of many shows that are part of the FanDuel Podcast Network. Thanks for tuning in. Before we get into the transactions this week, remember that the FanDuel NFL High-Low is a free-to-play fantasy football contest that you can play over on FanDuel. All you have to do is build your scorecard with the teams you think will score highest or lowest in 4 stat categories. The closer you are to being spot on, the more points you'll get. Players with the most points each week will split the prize pool, and a perfect scorecard will win the jackpot. Head over to FanDuel.com today and play the FanDuel High-Low for free. Eligibility restrictions apply. Go to FanDuel.com or download the FanDuel app for more details. Sell Tom Brady. At the start of the season, I told you guys that I don't hold back on this show. I tell you, or I try to tell you exactly how I'm feeling about players. And while my heart says Tom Brady's going to throw 4 touchdowns per game for the rest of the year, my brain says, don't be emotional about this, JJ. Now, let's be honest. Anyone who listens to this show, they shouldn't be that surprised by Tom Brady's start. Because on an episode of the Late Round Podcast from early August, I called out the Buccaneers passing attack as having one of the best early season schedules. And that's not a victory lap by any means. It didn't take a lot of effort for me to share that. According to Pro Football Focus's secondary rankings entering the year, the Buccaneers were facing the bottom 2 secondaries in football in weeks 1 and 2. And the greatest quarterback of all time tore them apart. Brady now has 9 touchdowns in 2 games. And the only quarterbacks with more fantasy points right now are Kyler Murray and Patrick Mahomes. Both of those quarterbacks have done some work on the ground, though. Tom Brady hasn't. And that's the problem. That's why I'm trying to think with my head here. For a quarterback to really thrive in today's fantasy football game, one of 2 things needs to happen. And I talk about this all the time. He either needs good rushing production or he needs to be an outlier from a passing perspective. We know Tom Brady is not going to be running the football a whole lot. You and I can probably run just as fast as Tom Brady. That's not true, but let's just pretend it's true. That means that in order for Brady to be a true difference maker, he needs to post crazy numbers. So you might be sitting there listening to me right now and saying, JJ, isn't he already showing us that he can post these crazy numbers? Well, yes and no. The fact that Tom Brady is not even close to the clear-cut QB1 in fantasy football after throwing 9 touchdowns in 2 games, that's telling. The fact that he's only scored 6 more fantasy points than Daniel Jones and Jalen Hurts, despite having 4 more passing touchdowns than those 2 quarterbacks combined, that's telling. Tom Brady threw 40 touchdowns last year, and he was the QB 10 in points per game. He was the QB 11 if you include Dak Prescott, because he doesn't run the ball. Now look, Tom Brady has great weapons, the best weapons in the league. He's bound to have better than average efficiency numbers. But what he's doing right now is still not sustainable. Through 2 weeks, Brady's thrown a touchdown pass on 10.5% of his attempts. His career average touchdown rate is 5.5%. It was 6.6% last year. The NFL record for touchdown rate in a single season is 9.9%. So through 2 weeks, Tom Brady is far outpacing anything that he's done throughout his career, and he's also pacing to break the league's touchdown rate record. And look, maybe that can happen, but you guys know how I think in fantasy football. I don't bank on something like that. And here's the other thing that no one's really talking about. The Buccaneers have scored 9 offensive touchdowns across these 2 games. That's tied for the most in football. Guess how many rushing touchdowns they have? 0. To assume that all of Tampa Bay's touchdowns are going to end up as passing touchdowns by the end of the season, that's not very wise. That doesn't make that much sense. From 2011 to 2020, the average pass to rush touchdown ratio across the league has been 1.9. Even if we bump that up to like 3.5 or something like that for the Bucks, a ratio that's been hit by only 13% of teams over this time frame, then you're immediately looking at 2 fewer passing touchdowns this year for Tom Brady if they had a 3.5 pass to rush touchdown ratio. That might not seem very significant, but it would place Tom Brady immediately in the QB8, QB9 range. No one should be expecting Tom Brady to disappear. We just shouldn't lose sight of the fact that they faced 2 really bad secondaries to start the season. We shouldn't lose sight of the fact that this is unsustainable. And we also shouldn't lose sight of what matters for quarterbacks in fantasy football. So if there's someone in your league who's valuing Tom Brady as a top 3 quarterback in fantasy football right now, if you're in a standard scoring league, I think you can sell him. Add Rondale Moore. The target leader for the Arizona Cardinals through 2 games, not DeAndre Hopkins. It's Rondale Moore. Moore has 13 targets, 11 catches, 182 yards, and a touchdown. And while we absolutely should expect DeAndre Hopkins to see more work in this offense, you have to love how Arizona is using Rondale Moore. It's exactly how he should be used. According to Next Gen Stats, among the 60-plus wide receivers with 10 or more targets this year, Moore is third to last in average air yards per target. They're keeping him close to the line of scrimmage, and they're letting him make plays with his athleticism. That's exactly how he was used at Purdue. That's exactly how you should be using Rondale Moore. He's still out there in 2/3 of Yahoo leagues. Go ahead and get him. Buy A.J. Brown. So Tennessee got a really big win on Sunday. A.J. Brown, though, was not very good. He ended up catching 3 of his 9 targets, and he only had 43 yards. And according to Next Gen Stats, his expected catch rate was almost 20 percentage points higher than his actual catch rate. But there's still reason for optimism. Brown's seen target shares of about 23% in each of the Titans' first 2 games. And those target shares are now within an offense that should throw the ball more. Because of game script and because Tennessee's defense has not been playing very well and probably won't be very good this year, the Titans have a pass-to-rush attempt ratio of 1.21 to start the year. They haven't had a season like that since 2015. More passing touchdowns are going to come too. So far, only 1 of Tennessee's 5 touchdowns have come through the air. That gives them a 0.25 pass-to-rush touchdown ratio. Since Ryan Tannehill took over that offense, the Titans have averaged a 1.33 pass-to-rush touchdown ratio. That 0.25 number is bound to regress favorably for this passing attack. Way better days are ahead for A.J. Brown. Add Emmanuel Sanders. Now look, I know I've talked about Emmanuel Sanders on this show in the past already this season, but I think he's still a very good add. He's now seen 18% of Buffalo's targets this season to go along with, according to Pro Football Focus, an average depth of target of 19.7. The Bills are using him as a deep threat. He's currently a fringe top 10 player in air yards. Those deep balls just have not connected. Josh Allen has now thrown it 15 or more air yards 17 times this year. He's connected on just 4 of those. That's a 23.5% completion rate. And that's worst in the league among players with 10 or more of those passes. Last year, Josh Allen connected on 48.5% of those. That's significantly more. So we should expect Allen to get better in that department. And if he gets better, who's he going to target? The guy who's getting downfield, Emmanuel Sanders. Add Cordero Patterson. I guess Cordero Patterson is a thing. In week 1, Patterson was outsnapped by Mike Davis 75% to 33%. Davis saw roughly double the number of carries and 3 times the number of targets. This past week, though, things were a little bit different. Patterson saw a slightly more favorable snap share split, but the way Atlanta divvied up their backfield touches was way better for Patterson. Davis saw 9 carries, Patterson saw 7. Davis had 7 targets, Patterson had 6. The Falcons showed a little bit more life offensively in week 2. And their next 3 games are against the Giants, the football team, and the Jets. They could face more neutral and positive game scripts, which will help that backfield. Buy Austin Ekeler. So on last week's 10 Trend Show, I sort of gave you guys an extra buy transaction when talking about Austin Ekeler. In that game against Washington in week 1, Ekeler wasn't targeted at all, but he did see the team's goal line work. The biggest knock on Austin Ekeler since he's become a thing has been the lack of touches near the goal line. In week 2, we had more of a vintage Austin Ekeler performance. He had a 22.5% target share, and he had about 64% of the Chargers' running back rushes. This is sort of a buy high moment for Austin Ekeler, in my opinion. He scored 22.5 PPR points in week 2. It's not like the manager who has Ekeler is sitting there saying, I got to get rid of him right now. But I honestly don't think that we've seen Austin Ekeler's ceiling. The Chargers didn't have any official goal line plays in week 2, but they did have a 2-point try. And on that 2-point try, guess who ran it in? Austin Ekeler. That now gives us a sample size of 3 goal line rushes in 2 games for this offense, and all of those rushes have gone to Austin Ekeler. If that continues, all while seeing one of the best target shares in the league at the running back position, Austin Ekeler could have an insane season. Add Henry Ruggs. So look, Henry Ruggs' peripheral numbers have not been amazing to start the year. In week 1, his target share was 9.6%. In week 2, 18.9%. But sometimes big games can lead to bigger and better things. On Sunday, Ruggs took that 19% target share. He turned it into 5 catches for 113 yards and a touchdown. On the season, he ranks in the top 40 in air yards across the league. And Derek Carr is playing really, really well. So he's worth a flyer off the waiver wire. Hold James Robinson. So James Robinson's now scored fewer than 10 PPR points in back-to-back weeks. He didn't have a single performance last year with fewer than 10 points. So the question is, should we be panicking right now? And I think the answer to that is yes, we should be panicking. If you drafted James Robinson, you shouldn't feel very good right now. But the reason he's a hold is because it seems like expectations for Robinson have shifted. And has everything to do with how Jacksonville split up that backfield with Carlos Hyde. But here's the thing, in week 2, things looked much, much better for James Robinson. His running back rush share went from 31% in week 1 to almost 70% in week 2. His target share was still 9.1% in week 2 as well. He's now seen 9 of the 14 running back targets in this offense through 2 weeks. So if you've got Robinson in a PPR format, I think he's going to be fine enough moving forward. I don't think he's going to come close to the ceiling that he showed last year, though. If it's a standard league, I'd be a little bit more concerned. I really wanted to shout him out on today's show, though, because number 1, I've gotten a lot of questions about him. But number 2, I wanted to point out that things did get better for James Robinson in week 2, and that's a good thing. Buy Kenny Golladay. So if you guys recall, back in week 1, in my 15 transactions article that I write on numberfire.com each week, I wrote the following. Golladay could get off to a slow start. There's a chance that we'll shift to buying him right after week 2 is over. But for now, he's not someone I'd want to rely on to kick off my fantasy football season. So here we are. It's after week 2, and I'm saying buy Kenny Golladay. And here's the reason why. His peripherals through 2 games, they're not that bad. Sterling Shepard's gotten the highest target share in that offense at about a 28% target share, but Galladay's seen a 20% share. And he ranks in the top 20 in air yards. That's across the league. The reason that Golladay was a sell in the first place was twofold. They faced Denver and Washington. I didn't like those matchups for the Giants in particular. But then on top of that, he was coming off that injury. He hadn't gotten a lot of reps with Daniel Jones. But now with semi-decent peripherals, I think that you can send a low ball offer. I'm not saying break the bank for Kenny Golladay. I'm saying take some bench assets and try to upgrade them to Kenny Golladay. Because he's a talented wide receiver. And he gets Atlanta, New Orleans, and Dallas over the next 3 weeks. Sell Devin Singletary. So in week 1 against the Steelers, Zach Moss was not active for Buffalo. Devin Singletary was then the obvious lead back. He carried over 73% of the Bills' running back rushes, and he had a 10.2% target share in that game. This past week, Zach Moss was active. Singletary saw his running back rush share go down by about 12 percentage points. And his snap share dropped by about 9 percentage points. His target share, though, was almost identical from week 1 to week 2. The difference in production between those 2 games for Singletary was a 46-yard touchdown in week 2. He was a top 15 back in PPR formats this past weekend. But he scored 62% of his points on that one play. And here's the bottom line for Singletary. It's going to be tough for him to score touchdowns. We know Josh Allen takes away some looks from his running backs near the goal line. But we also saw Zach Moss get utilized as the goal line back in week 2. Buffalo had 1 goal line rush this past weekend. Zach Moss saw it. They had 3 rushes from within the 10, and Zach Moss saw 2 of them. It's just tough to see a real path for consistent upside for Devin Singletary. Add Van Jefferson. So we haven't seen this really, really big game from Van Jefferson yet, and we might never see it. This is more of a stash. The fact is, his peripheral numbers don't look that bad. He only has a 10.9% target share, but he's clearly been the number 3 wide receiver in this Rams offense. Cooper Kupp has played 106 offensive snaps, Robert Woods has been at 96, and Van Jefferson at 89. Jefferson's actually run 6 more routes according to Pro Football Focus than Robert Woods has. So if you can stash him, I don't think it's a bad idea. He's only rostered in 7% of Yahoo leagues, and not only could he eventually be flex viable, but he'd see a boost if we see an injury to Cooper Kupp or Robert Woods. Buy Devontae Smith. Only 9 wide receivers have seen target shares of 25% or better in each of the first 2 weeks of the season. One of those 9, Devontae Smith. Smith had a down game in week 2. He only caught 2 of his 7 targets for 16 yards. But this is why he's a buy. It's a buy low moment. As I talked about on the first 15 transactions episode of the season, Philadelphia's passing game schedule is awesome through the first half of the season. Now that San Francisco's out of the way, Philly gets a lot of games in a row where they're either going up against a beatable secondary or a game that could just shoot out or have a pass-heavy script for this Philadelphia offense. Next week for the Eagles, they get the Cowboys. Then it's the Chiefs, Panthers, Buccaneers, Raiders, and Lions. With Devontae Smith having a 27% target share through 2 weeks, I want that. Add Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones is a top 5 fantasy quarterback. And he's done this with just 2 passing touchdowns. This just shows the importance once again of quarterback rushing. Only Lamar Jackson and Jalen Hurts through 2 weeks have more rushing yards than Daniel Jones. And Daniel Jones is tied for the league lead in quarterback rushing touchdowns. Now, it's unlikely he's going to keep that up. But the passing matchups are going to get a little bit better for Jones. I alluded to that earlier with Kenny Golladay. And that starts this week against Atlanta. Atlanta entered the season as one of the weakest secondaries in the league, and they've done nothing to change our minds. They gave up 2 top 5 performances, one to Jalen Hurts and one to Tom Brady. So Daniel Jones at the very least is a pretty good streamer this week. Add Justin Fields. Now look, if I didn't include Justin Fields on this week's podcast, people would yell at me. So I'm including him even though he's rostered in about half of Yahoo leagues. But Andy Dalton's banged up. Justin Fields needs to be on your fantasy team. I podcasted this past offseason about the importance of quarterback rushing. Fields is the quintessential example of a quarterback who may struggle in real life, but he will be good in fantasy football. Or he more than likely will. I don't want to guarantee it. But guys, on Sunday, Fields threw the ball 13 times in relief for Andy Dalton. He ran it 10 times. He didn't even play close to a full game, but he now has 1 of 5 quarterback performances in the NFL this year with double-digit rush attempts. And you may think that he can't get by with his rushing. I would disagree. Just look at Jalen Hurts last year. Hurts was one of the worst clean pocket quarterbacks in the NFL last season. And yet during his 4 starts, he was an easy QB1 in fantasy football. Why? Because of his rushing. It matters that much. It can catapult an average to below average quarterback and make them very relevant in fantasy football. Now, it may be tough this week if Justin Fields does get the start against the Browns. But you want Justin Fields long term. Add the Las Vegas Raiders defense. There really aren't many obvious streaming options at defense this week, but I do think the Raiders kind of work. According to FanDuel Sportsbook, Vegas is a home 4.5-point favorite, and they're facing Miami. There's a 45.5-point over-under. As we know, Tua is banged up. That could help this Vegas defense. And by the way, the Vegas defense has actually been okay through the first 2 weeks of the season. They've had 5 sacks, an interception, and a couple of fumble recoveries. So I don't mind Vegas as a deeper streamer. The 16th transaction this week that you can't get in my 15 transactions column over on numberfire.com is the buy DK Metcalf. Look, you guys know that I'm happy. My guy Tyler Lockett is balling out right now. He's one of the best fantasy football wide receivers through 2 weeks. He's seen 30.8% of Seattle's targets. He's seeing a high average depth of target. He's also converting his deep balls at an absolutely insane rate. We're working with a small sample size right now, obviously. But Lockett's caught 4 of his 6 targets that have traveled 15 or more air yards, and he's converted those into 206 yards and 3 touchdowns. Meanwhile, DK Metcalf, his teammate, he's converted 1 of his 4 targets on those types of throws for 30 yards. And I'm not saying that this is all going to flip and he's going to be Tyler Lockett or that Lockett is a sell or anything like that. I'm saying that Lockett is not going to maintain this, like to this degree. And that Metcalf, all the while, has the exact same target share through 2 weeks. His production just hasn't come close to matching Tyler Lockett's. That's going to naturally normalize. So if you can buy Metcalf low as he sits in the shadows of Tyler Lockett, I would do it. Better days are ahead for Metcalf. That's going to do it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you've yet to subscribe to the Late Round Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter @LateRoundQB. Thanks, everyone. Talk to you tomorrow.